My name's Kris Ashton, and this is Howling Mad. The miles had left him footsore, and hunger was Billy's constant companion, but the worst carnage was now eight days behind him, and the barrel of the rifle slung over his shoulder had been cold for two. They had stayed put on his father's insistence while Bathurst was overrun. "We have a home ground advantage, we're safer here." But when marauders besieged their house and gave Billy his first inkling the living might be more dangerous than the dead, he had plucked up his rifle and begun a one-man exodus, first from his home and then from his hometown. Amid a dust storm of shock and grief, his only plan had been to head westward and seek out emptiness. In this altered world, a world where a freak such as he was deemed comparatively normal, emptiness was next to godliness. The town, silhouetted in the morning sun, seemed to rise from the bitumen as he ascended the crumbling road's gentle slope. Kangaroo Flats was a fly speck, a final civilised scrap on the fringe of the outback's desolate desert heart. Upon the porch of a weatherboard cottage sat an old man in an antique timber rocking chair. Billy unslung his rifle. He pointed the muzzle at the ground to show he meant no malice, but intended to take no chances. "Morning," the old man said, lifting his hand in a lazy greeting. "Morning," Billy said back. He stopped at the bottom of the porch stairs and then glanced over his shoulder to observe the bodies littering the road and the grass verge. "You won't need that thing," the old man said, motioning at Billy's rifle. "Haven't seen a creeper around here in ages. Crows got 'em all." "Crows?" "They love their eyes. Smart birds, crows. They soon figured out the creepers weren't a danger to them. They'd just fly in and peck out their eyes. It seemed to peck the heart out of them as well. They'd just lie down and give up. Maybe because they couldn't see." Yeah, it's in a sense it's a typical high concept horror story, and it seems to it brings together a couple of different archetypes from the horror genre and sort of meshes them together. So I think in that sense, it's your typical fun and fast-paced horror tale, but I think it's also about a man or a young man trying to figure out who he is after a fairly traumatic experience, and trying to find his place in what is essentially a post-apocalyptic world. Before COVID, my walk to work included a large park area where there were often crows in the area, and I remember looking at them one morning, and then for whatever reason an image popped into my head of a crow sitting on a zombie's shoulder and plucking out its eye, and it just sort of grew from there. I thought about the crow maybe plucking out both the zombie's eyes, and then for whatever reason the zombie gave up and just sort of lay on the ground, essentially paralysed because it couldn't see. And the story germinated from that. In its initial version, it was called Crows, and it was a bit more of a Stephen King type story. And when I first finished that, I shopped it around a bit, but it didn't generate much interest, and I wasn't happy with it, and so I went back to it, and that was where a lot of the other twists came into it. Yeah, the first version was a lot shorter. I think it was only a bit over 2,000 words, and I knocked that out, I think, in only one or two sittings. And then when I went back to it, it probably took a little longer. I think, first draft took me probably another 2 or 3 days to add all the rest of the story. And it was one of those ones where I tried to tinker with it and really try to make it as good as it could be in the subsequent drafts. So I would say, but in its first draft form, you're probably looking at about 3 to 4 days. I'm a fairly fast writer once I know what I'm doing. I think there's a real talent in being able to create. You need all the elements, but they're compacted down. So you need a good story arc. You need to be able to have a well-detailed character or characters in the story. You need to be able to try to get that, if possible, that extra layer of meaning in there as well. It's very much about condensing and distilling the form. It's interesting because it's the form that has always come to me the most naturally. I struggle with really short stuff. I struggle with poetry, and I can write novels, but I find them probably trickier to do as well. The short story form is what's always come most naturally to me. And I think it is that it's essentially distilling the essence down to only 3,000 or 4,000 words and being able to put everything into that tiny little parcel and make it all work. I think if I could go back to myself in my earlier pre-published days, I would say the key thing is just making sure that your writing is good. I think the secret to being a good writer is realising that you're not one, and that you have to be constantly trying to improve yourself. It's an incredible, particularly paying markets, it's an incredibly competitive arena that you're playing in. With particularly pro-paying markets, sometimes for any given issue, you're up against hundreds of people, literally. And so even if you're a fairly good writer, it's probably not going to be enough. You really need to make sure that your story is the best it can be, drafting and redrafting. Beyond that, I think the other thing is making sure that your story suits the market that you're sending it to. What I've found over the years is most of the time when I've had a story accepted at that sort of market, it really suited the readership. It's really suited this, the submission guidelines, the kind of stories that market publishes. If your story and what they want locked together like pieces of Lego, then you're definitely going to improve your chances of acceptance. I do. It was when we say paying market, it was literally only about $5 or something, sort of a token payment. But at the time, it was pretty exciting anyway. It was a little zine published out of the UK called Sci Fantastic, and the story was called The Beauty Without. Which was a sort of a dystopian kind of a story where essentially being beautiful or being handsome is being criminalised, and there's two people trying to escape this sort of dystopian society. Favorite beverage? Wow. My favourite beverage would probably, when I was a bit younger, it was probably beer, but I'm in my 40s now, and I just get hangovers even from a couple of beers, so it's a once in a while drink for me these days. I'd say my favourite drink now is coffee. I really enjoy a good coffee. My favourite game, I do like board games actually. I've got a couple of young kids, and my oldest daughter's just old enough now to be really enjoying board games with me. So we've been playing Triominos and We played drafts last night, which is the first time I've played that in probably 30 years or something. So, yeah, I'm really enjoying getting back into board games, actually.